So it's my massive pleasure here today to introduce our three speakers. I'm really excited because we have some great speakers today who are real experts in this topic. So I'm sure you're going to have a great hour moving forward. So I'm going to talk very briefly about them and then pass over to them so they can do the interesting stuff, because I know you want to hear from them, not me today. So firstly, Professor Michael Dickmann. Michael is one of my good colleagues in the Changing World of Work group. He's a professor of international human resource management and really is, as many of you will know, an expert in international HRM, global mobility and global careers, and plays a leading role as part of that in the current EU-funded project around global mobility of employees, or GLOMO. He's also the senior editor-in-chief of the International Journal of HRM, so some great pedigree there. Secondly, and someone that I've met for the first time today, which is a pleasure, David Enser. I was very impressed when I looked at your biog, actually. David, fantastic and very impressive career, again in international HR and global mobility in particular. Most recently, before his current role, I think as head of cross-border employment for Adidas, but a whole range of fantastic positions there. He's also the founder of Res Forum. And if you don't know about Res Forum, it's an active network really of international HR and mobility professionals. And they do some fantastic work providing global mobility data, survey data, modeling and analytics. So some really good insights going into the field there from them. And they're also on the board and part of the GLOMO project that I mentioned in relation to Michael. So very much involved in broader research as well. And then last, but definitely not least, another colleague of mine in the world of academia, Dr. Benjamin Barder. Benjamin is a senior lecturer in human resource management at Newcastle University and also deputy head of the Leadership Work and Organisation Group. And he's again a real expert in international leadership and expatriate management, particularly focusing really on expatriate management in hostile environments, if you like, and he's done some fascinating work in that area. So you can see some real expertise in the room, so to speak, here, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say. So with that in mind, I'm going to pass on to Michael, who's going to start us off with the proper stuff for this webinar. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you very much, Emma, and hello everybody who is able to join us for our hour. I see we have 42 participants. That's really great. Thank you for your time. What we're doing is a webinar, but you know, when you hear about webs, you think you might cruise away for something like that. But actually what we want to do today is to also involve you and get you to work. So what we want to do is we want to depict developments and explore individual and organizational consequences of COVID-19 for global work, okay? We want obviously discuss some of the key issues, but we want you to join 3 breakout rooms. And those 3 breakout rooms are the following. In room 1, we discuss new working patterns and duty of care implications of COVID-19 and the new world of global work. In room 2, it's about organizational tensions and the impact of post-COVID global work. And then in room 3, we think about technology, the mobility of work rather than mobility of workers, and the new normal. Now, what we'd like you to do is to indicate which room you would like to use and attend. And so as an action, I would like to ask you to rename yourself by right-clicking on your Zoom name, choose then the option rename and put the room with the number in front of your name. So R1 would be for room 1 if you want to join the first room, and then R2 if you want to join the second room, R3 of course if you want to join the third room. While you do that in the background, we will continue to go on. If you find it difficult, you can put that into the chat in Zoom, because Graham Bell is very kindly helping us and tries to put you then into the appropriate room that you have chosen. So again, room 1 is new working patterns and duty of care. Room 2 is organizational tensions and impact of post-COVID global work. And room 3 is technology, mobility of work, and the new normal. Now, what we like to discuss often is a broader picture of what an environment and the hostility potentially in an environment would look like. So we often think about crisis times in global mobility and hostile environments. And these could be physically hostile environments. And Ben and I, together with another colleague, we edited, for example, a special issue on hostile environment. And mostly it's about physical threats like terrorism or criminality. It could be, of course, weather patterns. It could be psychological threats. It could be institutional threats. But what we want to pick up on today is on the right-hand side, and that's to do with COVID. Now, what do we know about working abroad in either crisis times or in hostile environments like COVID? In a nutshell, individuals report often dangers to life or health. There are many psychological threats that they're suffering from. These include stress, work-life balance issues, sometimes a perception of loneliness and isolation. There might be a loss of trust and engagement with the organization if the individual sees that the organization isn't really preparing well for their particular situation. Now, families also report a range of things that include positive and negative elements. I've concentrated here on more negative ones. So they report fears, they report work-home spillover effects that then impact them psychologically, and this might even lead to relationship tensions. Okay, and in turn, if we go from an organizational perspective, there's a range of things that organizations feel challenged with. They report huge costs often in hostile environments. They report it becomes more difficult to attain their goals in terms of the objectives they pursue with global mobility. They report some disengagement of individuals, retention problems of individuals, reputational problems if they've been caught out by a crisis, sometimes assignment resourcing problems, so they can't find the right person to go to a particularly hostile place, and sometimes legal exposure. Now, with the onset of COVID-19, we, meaning in this case Ben and I, together with ResForum and sponsored by EY Ernst & Young, we did a research that looked at basically now, next, and beyond in terms of COVID and global mobility. I've just picked out one of the slides that we showed in terms of some of the data, and that was basically the beyond element. So what companies thought would be the long-term crisis impact of COVID-19. In terms of the extent of their international operations, in the long term, they actually didn't think that that would be much impacted by COVID. So that's on the left-hand side. However, they thought that that virtual work would be used to a much larger extent, and we, with the lockdown 3 here in the UK, we can see it. But these were questions about longer term, after we have a vaccine and after we kind of coexist with COVID and can handle it. They also believed that there would be a dramatic reduction in travel and international business travel after we control the pandemic better, and to some extent reduced numbers of assignees, so short and long-term assignments after the pandemic. In reality, and it becomes clearer with every month that we live with COVID, there are dramatic changes to the world of work that we are expecting. And these are things that we want to, of course, explore in a bit more depth today. Now, let me go and bring in Ben and Dave to this discussion. So, Ben, What do you see as the major impact on individuals conducting global work triggered by COVID-19?
I mean, first of all, in terms of the research we've done, what I found really interesting, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we gathered data in the late first half of 2020, and it's been published in June 2020. So the interesting thing is, if you compare the assessment back at that time to what we see now, is really well, interesting in the sense of what people at that time had foreseen. And if you look where we are now, getting back to the biggest challenges, the major impact it has, I think what people foresaw is there's going to be a decrease, maybe halted international travel, but it's not going to go completely away. But I think most people had kind of hoped that we get out of this situation at some point. And so the major impact on individuals is probably or at least from a Western perspective and white collar perspective, the mental impact. So still living in a lockdown situation in most countries in the world. UK is, I mean, we started out with 3 tiers, then it became 4 tiers, so it's national lockdown, whatever, so they increase it. Germany, Chancellor Merkel is talking about locking the country down till Easter and that kind of thing. So the major impact is probably living with the uncertainty and having to organize your life, having no social life whatsoever, having a little childcare and so on, and at the same time manage your work at home. So basically perform on all fronts. You're required to perform in your job. You're required, if you have family, to perform there, and juggle all that. So and I think this is really the major impact we experienced so far.
Yeah, and if you think about further on, in a sense of really when, let's fast forward for a year or so, and we are hopefully in a situation where most of the population is vaccinated. What do you think organizations and individuals would do now? What do they struggle then with?
Well, they will do that. Well, hopefully go back to a normal life. And with regard to global mobility, that's very interesting what we found in this research and pretty much every follow-on piece we've done with the REST Forum. There's a split between some companies saying we go back to normal. There's going to be as many international assignments as there were. However, those assignments is going to continue or at least come back are going to be different, and others say we have little no international assignments anymore. We go back, we just don't do that anymore. So I think it certainly will change the way we think international work, and then maybe also the way we do international work.
Okay, thanks, Ben.
So that's here, if I may, Michael. I think there's also an interesting emerging trend of organizations looking to apply their learnings from the last year and actually use them to shape their employer brand and how they attract future talent. Take, for example, the concept of digital nomads, work from anywhere. You see more and more, not just technology firms, but more and more organizations coming out and saying, in future, work from wherever you want. Some have said that, albeit domestically, which just seems to be trying to get a little competitive advantage without making too much change. But others have said on a wholesale basis, we don't mind where you work, complete flexibility as an essential pillar of their employer brand strategy, which I find fascinating.
Yeah, and I really wanted to bring you in just now, Dave, because the idea that we all hear often these days is to move beyond the mobility of workers to the mobility of work. So bring work to wherever people are.
Yeah.
And it might be a pure form, or it might be some hybrid form in the future, right? Like what Capgemini calls the new hybrid emerging world of work. How do you see that?
I see it being, I see it being a brand advantage if done correctly. I think it can be used to address, talent shortfalls by making you more attractive as an employer by offering a true flexibility of work. I think there are certain limitations and certain challenges. I mean, when we talk around things like, risks and performance management or knowledge transfer, these kind of concepts, I think organizations are going to have to think long and hard about such things. I heard a really interesting this concept of moving work to people and then expecting virtual collaboration. I heard this wonderful expression talking to a sales director of a pretty big multi-million relocation organization who used the expression "sales is dead," which is fascinating. Organizations have made such a gigantic leap in the way that they collaborate. Google Hangouts, Microsoft Teams, these kind of virtual collaboration platforms, that where does that leave the poor old sales guy who's still trying to make his cold calls and sending emails when people have largely shifted away from emails in many ways and don't really pick up their phone anymore so much as they're using Microsoft Teams, coming to the point of virtual collaboration, as we all are. I've got 2 boys homeschooling downstairs at the moment. And all of their classes are done on MS Teams, and when they have a question, they call each other through Teams. So it's very hard to break into that inner sanctum as an outsider. And I think then that has an impact, for example, on knowledge sharing. I think how organizations, again, collaborate across borders using these platforms. I think there are risks inherent with some of these things. I think not just, one thing that leaps out to me, and I'm sure there are I've seen 1 or 2 people who I know on the attendee list here. 1 or 2 people would, I'm sure, have a much more developed view than I do on compliance risk when it comes to taxation of cross-border work. But I've been fascinated by seeing tax legislation certainly evolve, of course, over the last 12 months. It's the first time that I've ever seen, for example, the OECD having to legislate. I think it was back in May of 2020 when they began to legislate for people who were either chosen voluntarily to be in an alternative location to the one where their employer is based, or they've been stranded in a third location on their way between locations, and therefore beginning to look at the tax and the compliance consequences of such things. The rise of the digital nomad, if you will, work from anywhere. I know that's not quite, true virtual working, but it is, in a sense, it's people choosing to work where they want to work. And then, of course, the compliance requirements that stem from that. I do think that there will be an awful lot less travel as a consequence of this, particularly for the next sort of 4 to 5 years. I think when I look at many sort of major travel associations and industry bodies, and airlines as well, they're not predicting a return to pre-pandemic levels of business travel for the next 4 or 5 years, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, Michael or Ben, but something along those lines. And also, of course, this concept of health becoming a risk factor, health passporting, that kind of stuff, pre-departure testing, that kind of stuff. Some airlines won't even let you on board now without a health test. So I think that's fascinating. And then, of course, amongst all of that, as technology and automation begins to redefine, of course, performance, but also begins to redefine roles. Roles will be fully reshaped by some of the things that we've seen, the level of technology, this leap forward over the last 12 months in terms of how technology can best be deployed for an organization. Well, where does that leave the shape of people's roles? If 30, 40, 50% of a role is automated, what does the person then do? Is it a direct impact on headcount? Or is it a shift in focus? People talk about raising the strategic profile and automating the basics so that you can get on with the real meat. But what does that actually mean in practice? And another fascinating, perhaps my final fascinating, well, not my final fascinating, but a point that I find fascinating is what's the impact on site strategy of all of this? If an organization's been planning to make a very big investment in an overseas office or to invest in whatever location, a new office in, say, Paris, and then suddenly everyone realizes that you don't need to set up an office in Paris, fill it with 500 employees from all around the world. Why can't they be doing that work from other locations? Do they really need to go through that very expensive setup process? And rather focus, for example, on remote onboarding and using a lot of the learnings that we've seen in the last 12 months around where companies have invested in that remote onboarding experience. So I think we are going to see some pretty big change in these kind of things. And then, let's see what the next 12 months bring.
Dave, thank you very much. You raised a range of really exciting and fundamental problems and issues, of course, and challenges, maybe. Ben, any comments before we go into the breakout rooms?
Indeed, I mean, what I really found interesting, Dave, that you brought the concept of the digital nomad up, because that is something, I mean, you and I have been discussing that at least 5 years ago, maybe longer ago, so even at our event at Allianz Arena. And what what I can see is in terms of the research we've done with companies ever since the outbreak of COVID is that there's still, on the one hand, yes, an openness to, well, we allow that people work from anywhere because we don't have a choice, and we increasingly see that it works. But at the same time, there's a good number of companies who's giving a rather pessimistic outlook, as in like, can we have anybody working from anywhere even after this global pandemic because of, and at least that's, I can base it on hard data right now because we haven't completed a piece of research, but from speaking to people, what I can see is that at least in some industries, they start already ring fencing the old status quo and basically working towards getting back to that. And I find it really interesting because the digital nomad is one thing I truly hope will be much more common than it ever was.
I know what you mean on the digital nomad. In my prior role working for a big German sports firm, I advocated for digital nomads for a long time. And perhaps, dare I say it, the organization, the leadership weren't quite ready for it. And now, of course, as a consequence of the times in which we live, they were forced down a path where they've had to accept that, at least for a temporary period. I also know another very, very big Austrian brand who had an absolute pathological resistance to any concept of remote working, any concept even of home working. They hated the idea of. The CEO and the management board were fundamentally against it. And since COVID, the chief technology officer began to advocate, look, why can't we just begin to play with this topic? Why? When we know we have challenges of attracting people to a fairly remote place in the middle of nowhere in Austria, and the CTO put so much pressure that the board not caved but began to bend a little bit and accommodate it. And now, interestingly, I hear more conversations less about returning people to how they were before and more about beginning to accommodate people in various far-flung locations, you know, working from Australia for the benefit of a European entity, etc. So even the more traditional organizations are beginning to shift their thinking, perhaps.
Okay, let me go and share some slides again. Because we are at the time where we want to bring people into the breakout rooms. If I pick up some of the ideas that you've just talked about digital nomads and about ring fencing and about change, it's really quite interesting that what I perceived in the last few years was often that global mobility departments were saying we are not really taken as equals. We need to strengthen our role and standing in an organization. Now with COVID, this is a real chance actually for global mobility professionals, because suddenly we get the data that their reputation has increased positively. And that they are being listened to in 2020 more. Yet at the same time, you have the challenge that the mobility of workers might move to the mobility of work. Global work won't go away, but it will be shaped completely different. So global mobility professionals and talent professionals probably need to be much more proactive these days and need to develop a vision for what the global world of work will look like in the future. So to discuss this, again, I would like us to go into these 3 different rooms where you're interested in. So room 1 was new working patterns and with Ben. Room 2 is organizational tensions and impact with me. And room 3 is technology and mobility of work with Dave. Graham, if you could put us for about 15 minutes into the breakout rooms, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure, that's no problem at all. So I'm just going to quickly swap one person who just wants to move room. So if you just bear with me a second. I'll tell you what, I'm going to open the rooms and then I'll swap people once you're in the rooms. So if you go into your rooms that you're assigned, I'll just move the couple of people that have asked to change rooms afterwards. So yep, rooms will be open for 15 minutes. You'll get a little message that basically says to join the room. If you just click that, it should take you through.
Okay, lovely. Thank you, Graham.
Okay, so welcome back to everybody rejoining us from the breakout sessions. Just a little alert, the recording's restarted again. And Michael, shall I hand back to you?
Yes, by all means, thank you, Graham. And I want to say thank you to Christopher, who was just talking while we were pulled back. This is the virtue of Zoom, or the pain of Zoom, I'm afraid. Let's make a quick recap what happened in the 3 breakout rooms. Ben, can I ask you to recap?
Yeah, just real briefly. So we're talking, I mean, time was rather limited. We're focusing on the duty of care role and how different employers will basically live the role, what they can or cannot do. And I mean, we all agree that it's a rather difficult and unprecedented situation. And eventually, I mean, the most important thing is, like, hopefully we get out of this at some point soon, and maybe a learning or two on the way won't hurt. I mean, things like domestic abuse and the issues related to that, and how much this falls into the employer duty of care has been discussed, and in general what duty of care means, and what the letters of the law and the legal requirements on the one hand, and the spirit of providing duty of care basically mean are not necessarily always the same thing.
Okay, thank you, Ben. Was there 1 or 2 recommendations that for us to say that's what we can learn from other organizations, anything like that?
Well, not necessarily what you can learn from other organizations. Organizations are different, and it was a rather small breakout room, so I can't draw upon the wealth of many organizations. But even then, we could see, like, things are different in different companies. Okay. But if you want one takeaway, like, listen to the employees, listen about their needs, their particular individual situation, and what they want to, I mean, what they perceive as valuable.
Okay, listen and be agile, in other words, in terms of
yeah.
Okay, thank you, Ben. Dave, wherever you are, I can't see you right now.
Oh, can you not?
There you are. Now I can.
Yes. I had a really fantastic group, so thank you to everyone who joined the R3 group. It was really lovely. We had a really healthy mix of consultants, academia, and industry as well, which we had a very fruitful discussion. I think we broke it into 3 sections. First, on sort of pure technology, what we've seen emerging. Second, really about working locations. And managing working locations, and the third one we almost got to risk and compliance, and then literally I just saw the seconds ticking down, and we couldn't quite make it. On the first point around technology, we were really lucky to have different views. As I said, we had consultants' views, we had industry views, and we also had, for example, tech startup views specific to the mobility industry, which was really helpful. We explored the emergence of AR, augmented reality, and VR in different applications, the relocation process, home finding, shipping, etc. Deloitte also shared about how they've moved towards virtual conferences and virtual campuses. And I've been to one of their sort of virtual show. Well, I've been to their big digital playground in Berlin, actually, the Greenhouse. It was truly a fantastic location. They've certainly got the tech for it. And I can imagine it's a pretty interesting experience. Now, one point that came out was organizations are still dipping a toe in the water. There is still a little bit of nervousness there. It's still maybe a general feeling that there's lots of talk and not necessarily huge amounts of movement still into that space of adoption of AR and VR. But at the same point, and I think quite rightly, the point was called out that the cost of adoption of new technology is not necessarily what people may think it is, which I think is a really critical point. And technology can be adopted at relatively reasonable cost, and at the same time then transforming your world of work for the rest of the organization. Now that can be applied to the context of what we discussed, which is the relocation process and home finding. And what's the person who would have been showing you houses or finding houses for you doing, if not searching for properties for you? What are they doing? They're holding your hand and making sure you're okay. And that's a really positive experience. That's a leap forward in the way that technology is deployed to aid and augment employee experience. And I think that was a really interesting point. Then we talked around, for the second piece, which, as I said, was around work locations. We had a really nice view of, I wouldn't quite put you in that baby boomers. I think you're younger than you think you do, perhaps. And one person talked about moving away from policies to principles, so beginning to look at people as more of an individual, which I quite like, and it's certainly something that rings true with what I've seen in industry and what companies are doing, looking at personal circumstances. Also the way that generations collaborate as well. We briefly touched upon that and sadly ran out of time because that's also a topic that I find fascinating. And then where we came out is that we expect the world to come back to some sort of hybrid way of working. That's to say that, you know, legislation for full remote working, digital nomads, etc., is still trying to catch up. And also sector by sector, there's a relevance if you work in fashion versus if you work in tech versus if you work in whatever other area. But I think where we all came out is there's a benefit to a hybrid working model. That's to say part-time at home and part-time in the office. But then we talk, why in the office? Are you in the office to work? No, you're not. You're in the office to collaborate. And I think that's the critical takeaway. And if you ask me to call out 2 points, I would say on the first point, on the first section around technology, it's the cost of adoption is not what people think it is, and it can be transformative. And on the second one is fully expecting a shift to some sort of hybrid working arrangement, part remotely, part in an office. But why are you in the office? You're not there just to work, you're there to collaborate. And I think that's the key piece.
Great, thank you, Dave. And in fact, this gives me rich material to link our discussions to what Ben and Dave's groups have discussed. Maybe starting off with our last point that was curtailed, I guess. Christopher's point about started off to basically say that individualization that you talked about, right? That understanding of the individual, and also linked to a hybrid model or whatever model emerges, needs better managers and better skill sets that include how to deal, monitor, engage people in a virtual or semi-virtual world, depending on whether it's a hybrid activity, but also a mindset of trust and others. And Kemi talked about how performance often goes up when people work remotely. Yeah, that it isn't by no means it means that performance might suffer. No, can go up. Now, we discussed also the sort of love-hate relationship of people to travel. So some people who are very happy to not travel anymore, or for a time being possibly, while others who just need that sort of buzz and the sort of pollinating effects as bees going from one place to another to understand things in a better way. Now, Steve actually started off with the whole discussion about grounding us to where we are right now. And that is a lot of insecurity in this volatile and uncertain environment, which means planning becomes really quite difficult. What you can do is you can start to try to plan in an agile way, to scenario plan or whatever it is in organizations to be a bit more prepared. And Catherine added that insourcing expertise would see currently a stronger drive. Overall, however, there was also an underlying element around the operational model, whether international travel or international assignments are truly part of your operational model. And if they are, they're currently, you have some disadvantages, some limits that you see. Olga talked about already having lost a key client in the Middle East because it's part of the operational model of her organization that you would travel and meet people. Presumably Middle East is a society that is about physical contact or being close to each other and being, as we call it, a diffuse society where you mix private and work life, right? So overall, it is something to do with understanding how your company operates and how it works, to then use global work to strengthen that and to achieve those objectives. Any quick comments before I go to the last slide to round up what we've done in that sphere? And that is some recent research that we have done, where we asked also global mobility experts around currently the strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities and threats that they are perceiving now for the new global world of work. This is a shortened extract because we don't have the time, but in a quick wrap-up, the strengths of the current situation, they saw that local ideas get implemented, and truly that diversity is more appreciated, and that was, you know, local diversity and diverse ideas and implementation ideas. And that instead of a big change program, because we all had to, the acceptance of digital work was very high in their organizations. Weaknesses they saw currently, compliance and risk management, that they needed a much more granular understanding of where people were, how they worked, and what kind of legal and regulatory impact that would have. And that was the same with the EY survey. Health and well-being of staff working at home amidst a pandemic is a current concern. And obviously, we all know that we hear it almost every day on the news, how people are affected in terms of their well-being, right? In the long term, they saw a range of opportunities. We picked out two for today, and that is local talent they felt was much more engaged and much more identifying with the overall organization, and that they would work consciously about rethinking the future of working and living through moving work to people as opposed to moving people to work. Things that we've discussed, and especially in Dave's breakout room. In terms of threats, we heard that actually looking at operational models and how they might change might mean that you need to redesign interfaces between global mobility and talent, or also global mobility and line managers, ultimately understanding what the new global work might look like. If you look into one step back around what the dangers of large multinationals, is that global leadership and cultural and operational cohesion of the organizations across borders might actually be impacted if you have fewer global workers. Okay, in the sense of actually globally mobile workers per se. So ultimately, a lot of what I've heard today is actually captured all that little SWOT analysis very well. I thought this was a very, very fruitful discussion for 1 hour. We will provide the results in various forms. Is there any last question before I go to Emma to present the next event that we have? Anybody having a last quick question?
I'll make an observation, Michael, if I may. I would also just say on your weaknesses, I think well-being, as we've seen from a separate piece of ResForm research, really is the topic, the benefits topic for 2020 and also 2021. And if anybody's interested in seeing the full version of that SWOT analysis and the research and the full paper behind it, the ResForm will be publishing that. It's the product of interviews with about 15 to 20 heads of mobility from around the world, and the full results will be published by ResForm at the end of this month.
Yeah. They're in production, hot off the press. I felt I can present some bits already. Okay, right, lovely. Thank you very much. I'll go and share the screen again for the last slide so that Emma can present what we're doing next time.
Okay, thank you, Michael. And before I do that, just to say a very big thank you to our three presenters today. Obviously to Michael, Dave and Ben, thank you very, very much. I do feel it's been fantastic for us to have you and your expertise on this webinar. So thank you very much. Yes, that's the right slide, Michael. Sorry, I looked a bit fixated then because the slides were moving in front of my face and I wasn't sure what was happening. So thank you very much for doing this. As I said at the beginning of the webinar, we are running monthly webinars within the Changing World of Work group at the moment on a number of different perspectives that we hope are of interest to you. Our next one in February is on the 12th of February, so almost exactly a month today, with another colleague from the Changing World of Work group, Monica Franco Santos, and one of our doctoral researchers, Daniel Afonso. And they are going to be focusing on something related, of course, and may have come up in some of your discussions, but quite different. around managing team performance remotely during COVID-19. And I think that's a really important topic, actually, because when I have conversations with people within organizations at the moment, one of the questions actually that comes up quite often still from managers is around, well, how do we manage performance and productivity when actually we're not in the office with our people and we can't see what they're doing on a day-to-day basis? Monica has done a lot of work in this area, and they have been collecting some data on this topic. So I'm sure that's going to be a fascinating webinar in a month's time, and I will be pushing that out during on the normal channels. So please do join us for that if you think that sounds interesting. We have been doing this for a few months now, and we'll carry on. The recordings of our webinar are available on the website for the Changing World of Work group and on the Cranfield YouTube channel. So please do feel free to pick up on any of the past ones. But just to say thank you to all of you, as well as our presenters, for attending today. It's great to see everyone. Stay well and healthy, of course, in the current environment, but also have fun and try and enjoy life while we're still living through this madness. Okay, and thank you for coming today. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye for now.
Bye.